And so this is going to be broken up into a handful of relatively speaking short little lectures. And so it's going to have 6 parts, maybe 7. And so each one of those, we're going to be focusing on different aspects of the life of David. And I think there's some very significant things that we can get a chance to get some insight into. I'll also note that I'm not dealing with some of the familiar passages, but really trying to be focusing on the ones that give us some insight into the character of who he was. And so you'll see that as I get into the things that I chose to focus on. So this lecture will be focusing on an introduction. And so this is just my notes of some things that I saw that were significant, that were interesting for us to be thinking about. First of all, to think of his background, that he was an Israeli, he was close to his friends, and so he had some background, someone that had some skills. And what we can see from the text, it seems like he's from royalty. And so who knows what that would be if it was someone in England, maybe a duke or earl or something like that. But definitely someone that not only did he have skills of his own, but he was also in a position that he came from a family that helped him to get a leg up in some perspectives you might consider. He saw the importance of his faith, and this is something that he always went back to, and constantly it was a strength that he had. And I'm sure that's something that one of the reasons why the Lord was very grateful to be able to use him. He was taken to exile, so imagine being taken from your home, so wherever that might be, and taken to a foreign land. Everything would be different. And so that was something that he had to endure. He had the closeness to his friends, and we see that the way that he handled himself in ministry, that he was not only trying to provide for himself, but to provide for them. And he needed to have that connection to stay strong in his faith and his commitment to the Lord. So we see him, he's going to be in 3 different um, kings that he's going to be supporting. And so, first of all, let's get to that stage by thinking about, well, what he did. And so, refusing to eat of the Babylonian fine foods that were presented before him. We'll get a chance to talk about that as one of my um, vignettes to be thinking about his life. The dream that Nebuchadnezzar, the first king that he supported, was interesting to see how that was noteworthy. For me, it was really impacting to see that. And I even wrote that part of Daniel 2 in one of my textbooks when I was in school, because it was noteworthy to me as I was thinking about the amazing things of God, creation, and all that. So he prays to have an interpret to receive an interpretation, so we get a chance to be able to read that prayer. Very insightful to give us a sense of how he was engaging with the Lord. He receives the interpretation, and then after that he shares that interpretation with Nebuchadnezzar. All the while, the way that he goes about doing that, um, you could see that he had wisdom and skill, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So as a result of that, he's promoted. He's given the extremely high position. I would argue that others that he was working with, his peers, that now he was one of the senior officials in Nebuchadnezzar's reign, would have been jealous for that. Another thing we see is the Nebuchadnezzar's great statue. Um, and how does Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego deal with that? The friends of Daniel that we get a chance to be seen. And they refused to bow down and worship that great statue. So that's the first person that we see that Daniel is connected with. The second one is Belshazzar, and we don't get to see as much information about him, but he has this idolatrous feast. And what do we see? We see the handwriting on the wall, and no one can figure out what it is. And they've forgotten about Daniel. And finally, someone says, "Oh, by the way, This was someone for Nebuchadnezzar that was an advisor, so they bring him in and he interprets what's going on. He's promoted again to a very high position, but it really doesn't matter because that very night, it turns out that Belshazzar is put to death, and so he's back into relying on the Lord, and we see what's going to start to happen with this new individual, this older individual, Darius, who becomes king. So he's persecuted for his faith. People are jealous of his position. And so they created a law that you are only supposed to be um, giving praise to Darius. And it's made into law. They can't get around it. And so Daniel is put in the lion's den. We see Darius's response. He refuses food and entertainment, goes very early and sees that Daniel has been preserved, and he throws all the people that were his enemies into the lion's den, and they're quickly devoured by these hungry lions. And finally, there's a visions of Daniel, and I'm not going to be focusing on that in detail, but I just wanted to put that in context. Okay, so we see that Daniel is interesting. We don't see it when we just read it in English. It's written in both Hebrew and Aramaic. So we can see that those two parts are, I could argue that there's something significant or at least noteworthy for us to think about it. And I'll have another more detailed summary of what's in this book. And the red portions are going to be in Aramaic, and the black portions will be in Hebrew. So the dates attached to the visions located in them during the same period of history as the narratives of chapters 1 through 6. So we can see this is some interesting that we can think about this. The book begins in Hebrew, switches to Aramaic, and then switches back to Hebrew. And I'll just let that be seen when I go from black and red in just a moment. We have the vision of the four beasts in chapter 7. It mirrors in a number of ways Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. I'm not going to go over that vision. And then the message of the visions in chapters 7 through 12 reinforce the messages of the narratives of chapters 1 through 6. And once again, for this set of vignettes, I'm not going to be focusing on those visions. God's ultimate victory over the power and authorities of this present evil age is sure, so the wise will be faithful to the Lord. In the meantime, whatever pressures are brought to bear upon them. Okay, well, let's just go through a handful of outline charts, and these are from the ESV Study Bible for those that may be using that resources. And so, first of all, we see Daniel and his friends in Babylonian court. So it starts off in Hebrew. They're in Israel, and we see what's happening here. They're Daniel and his three friends are brought into exile. They decided to remain undefiled, will not eat the king's fine foods that violate Israeli dietary requirements. And all in this time that Daniel and his friends are promoted and they're preserved. Then what we see is Nebuchadnezzar's great statue dream. And so we have this dream come first. And so the dream and Nebuchadnezzar's threat that I'm not going to tell you what it is and to all these wise men, but you have to tell me what the dream is and tell it what it was, its response. Daniel gives a response after having time of prayer, and then he's able to interpret the dream. And as a result, Nebuchadnezzar promotes Daniel. So this is a nice vignette that we'll talk about by itself. Then we have Nebuchadnezzar's building a great statue. The nation is supposed to worship Nebuchadnezzar's statue, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are preserved in the fiery furnace. That they're not going to bend their knee; they're going to stay faithful to Jehovah, which is a wonderful thing. They're going to stay faithful to Yahweh. So Nebuchadnezzar promotes Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego after this miraculous way that we get a chance to see what happens here. So all of this is in Aramaic as we continue along here. Next, Nebuchadnezzar's toppled tree dream. This is something that we're not going to explore, but it is a tragic situation that we see. Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and its interpretation. Daniel provides that interpretation. Then it turns out that Nebuchadnezzar is actually humbled, and for an extended period of time that he's a madman. And so this is just what Daniel was saying. If only this could be concerning your enemies. And then we find Nebuchadnezzar's exaltation, and he comes to faith and believes in Yahweh. And that's just a wonderful thing that comes together in its final result of humbling Nebuchadnezzar, and then he's exalted in the Lord. Next, we have the second king that Daniel is connected with. Once again, all of this is in Aramaic. So Belshazzar's feast. So we see things at the very end of his reign. He has an adulterous feast, and all of the fine ware, gold goblets, and everything that was used in the by the priest in Israel. They're using this just thinking that they're all common ware, that he can do whatever he wants. There's an unreadable message. They don't understand what it is. And so what they do is they call upon Daniel to read this, and many, well, we'll come into that a little bit later. And it's a message of judgment, and instantly what happens is Daniel is promoted again, and shortly after that, Belshazzar is killed, and it's all over. And Darius the king then comes next. We have the situation of Darius and the lion's den. Daniel is promoted by Darius. You see that this is a person that has the right kind of skills. He wants to be in his court. So a third time that this happens, the administrators plot to remove Daniel because they feel that their position is being threatened. They see that the way that they're going to have to do it has to be related to Daniel's God and his faith and his undivided attention that he gives to Yahweh. Daniel preserves in the lion's den. This plot with them laying out that there's this what has to be and what can't be done. You can't pray to any other god except for Darius. He just goes in about his normal situation. He gets thrown into the lion's den, and he is preserved. Darius comes to the lion's den and calls on David. And so he really once again sees the character of this individual, how he is preserved, and the enemies of David are thrown in the lion's den, and they're the ones that suffer. Okay, then we have one last one of these visions that's in Aramaic, and this is the vision of the four great beasts in the heavenly court. I'm going to speed up for this portion since this is what we're not going to be covering. So that's the first of the visions. And then we have some things that are now looking towards the future, the vision of the ram, the goat, and the little horn, the Daniel's prayer and answer, Daniel's vision of the final conflict. And so we see some things that are happening during the time of Daniel, and then looking towards the future. And some of these ones towards the future, these are the ones that go back to Hebrew. And so that gives us a sense of what's going on. So just I'll finish up with these two charts and then have some questions that I'll leave with you. So the beginning of the book in Daniel, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and took Daniel and the other promising young people to Babylon to be trained in the Babylonian culture and literature. This deportation was the beginning of what came to be known as the Babylonian exile, which was a result of the Lord's judgment on his people. In Leviticus 26:33, the Lord threatens his people with exile if they were unfaithful to the terms of the covenant established at Mount Sinai, and that actually is what took place. So these are some of the notes for this first part. Nebuchadnezzar sought to assimilate the exiles into Babylonian culture by obliterating their religious and cultural identities and creating a dependence upon the royal court. So they were taking them out of what they know into a whole new culture, a whole new land, and they were forced to do this change. For this reason, the exiles were given names linked with the Babylonian deities in place of the Israelite names linked with their God. So Daniel, which is a name that God is my judge, Hananiah, Yahweh is gracious, Mishael, who is what God is, and Azariah, Yahweh is a helper. So those are the names that they had in Israel, and the names that they have based on the Babylonians were as follows. These were names that invoked the help of the Babylonian gods Marduk, Bel, and Nebu. And so Belshazzar, which is a name for Daniel, a lady that is wife of the god Bel, protect the king. Shadrach, I am very fearful of God, or command of Aku, the moon god. Meshach, I am of little account, or who is like Aku, and Abednego is servant of the shiny one, Nebu. So interesting things just for us to be thinking about for this introductory part of our reflection on Daniel. So here's a couple questions I'll leave with you. You can think about it, maybe talk about this with your friends. What impresses you about Daniel? There's so much about his life that I think is noteworthy. What would it be like to be taken into exile? And then finally, how well would we adapt to be servants in a foreign land contrary to our beliefs? Okay, well, that's it for this first part. Thank you.